This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Podker. Prior to European arrival, the Maya peoples built a civilization in the inhospitable lowland jungles of Middle America. The archeological site of Yaxnoca is in present-day Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula, near the Guatemala border. It is an area with agricultural challenges, and archaeology provides a valuable way to gain insight into the underlying resource management of the Maya peoples while understanding this dynamic urban history. We are joined by David Lentz, Professor of Biological Sciences and Executive Director at the University of Cincinnati Center for Field Studies, who spent many years studying Mayan sites such as Tikal and recently published a paper revealing new insights into the ceremonial blessings of a sports court. Professor Lentz, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Nate. It's a pleasure to be here.
I like to start with just a little bit of background, and I want to know what first got you interested in the ancient Maya.
Well, what got me interested in the ancient Maya was when I was a graduate student, I got an invitation to serve as the archaeobotanist for a project down in Honduras. This was a project directed by Dr. Ken Hurst. And so I spent a year in a very remote part of Honduras. It was there wasn't even a road into the site. We had to bring in our supplies by mule. And that was really fun for me because I spent a year collecting plants all up and down the valley. And I got to speak with Native Americans, and I worked with archaeologists, and that really got me started. And then from there, I had a Fulbright grant. I worked at the Copan site with some really outstanding archaeologists, William Sanders and David Webster, and that was really the first Maya site I worked on. The civilization or the people that we worked on in Honduras, they were probably Lenca or Xinca or some other group that lived near the Maya and were influenced by the Maya, but were not actually Maya. But then my first real experience with the Maya was at Copan, which is a fabulous site.
Okay, so skipping ahead a little bit and moving towards your work that brought us together today, I want to ask about the site at Yaxnoca. What brought it to your attention?
Well, Yaxnoca is a site that's it's about 10 kilometers to the south of the very well-known, or at least the very famous Calakmul site. But Yaxnoca was sort of unexplored, unknown, and a team of archaeologists led by Catherine Reese-Taylor and Armando Anaya got permission to do an archaeological project there. It's in the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve, and I was invited to serve as the archaeobotanist for that project. Very interesting place. It's one of those sites that's uncleared, so the forest still covers the whole site, and it was very remote. We lived in tents there. And but we learned a lot from that particular site. And one thing that we did at that site is we had improved our techniques with environmental DNA. So we were able to get a lot of information from that new technology, and it actually worked out pretty well. So that's one reason why Yaxnoca is near and dear to my heart.
So you mentioned it being pretty covered by the forest, and I know LIDAR has made a lot of changes happen with various sites down there. Did you guys have to use that in this case?
Oh, yeah. LIDAR was incredibly helpful, especially to my friend Nick Dunning, who works on reservoirs. And so they were able to locate all of the little aguadas or little ponds where the Maya would store water. The Maya and the central part of Mesoamerica, central Maya lowlands, they kind of had a problem because the rainfall is not regular. I mean, it's regular on an annual basis, but there's a part of the year when it rains like crazy, and then there's a part of the year where it doesn't rain at all or very little. And so the Maya constantly had a problem with having enough water to make it through the dry season. And what they did was they figured out ways to create these reservoirs and guadas, little storage tanks, so they can store water from the rainy season and keep it into the dry season. And this really allowed their populations to grow dramatically. And because of this system of reservoirs, the population in many areas grew 3- and 4-fold, which may have led to their downfall in the end, because to feed that many people, they had to clear more forest. And the more forest that you clear, then this changes the hydrologic cycle. And so that means there's the water that does come down is not trapped by the forest and resent into the atmosphere through transpiration. And so the Maya did some things that were inadvertently damaging to their whole system.
Now, I understand the soil in that area is also not great for farming. How did they work with land management in this?
Yeah, I think that that's a big issue. And the soil is very thin. It's not that bad because it's very basic in that it has a relatively high pH. And so there are nutrients in the soil. The big problem is the whole rainfall thing, that if you clear the forest away, then the sort of the underbedding of that forest is calcium carbonate. And it's a former seabed that was raised up. And, think coral. And so it's very porous. The soil is very porous. So if the water gets into the substrate, it will basically go down to the water table, which is 200 meters below the ground surface. And if it goes there, it would have been inaccessible to the Maya. So the more they cleared, the more water would go into the water table and less would be recycled in the form of rainfall. And so the underbedding was a problem. The soil is not that great. It's very thin. But if you get enough water and you implement some ways to conserve the soil, it's not so bad. So water is the main thing. It's not the absence of nutrients.
So thinking about that particular site, can we talk a little bit about what the time frame is when they were living there? What do you know about when this was populated?
Yeah, the Maya lived at Yaxtla starting in the Middle Preclassic. This is around 1500 BC. And really their heyday was in the late Classic that went from about AD 250 back to about AD or 500 BC or so. So that's when Yaxtla really grew into a civic ceremonial center. And there was a resurgence at Yaxtla, possibly related to the growth of Calakmul, which was nearby. And my suspicion is that Yaxtla was a resource center for Calakmul, the big center nearby. And they provided things like fuel and probably food as well. They grew a lot of vegetables. We have evidence for a lot of fruit trees at Yaxtla. So they were some kind of a provider to the people, the Maya living in Calakmul.
It becomes almost like a suburb.
Yeah, it sort of became like a suburb of Calakmul. Yes, exactly.
So part of the work that we're talking about today involves sports. And I want to ask what their kind of sporting life was like at that point in time?
Well, that's a great question, Nate. To be honest, we don't really know everything about their ball game. What we do know is what we can see from what's the glyphs that are written on ceramic vessels, from some of the books that we still have from the Maya. There are 4 books that are called codices. The rest were destroyed by the Spaniards. But we do have some information, and we still have the ball courts themselves that are preserved. And it looks like what happened was that these ball courts were, unlike for us, we go to see a football game, and it's recreation. Although people elevate that to a various serious kind of activity. And it certainly was for the Maya. Probably their ball game was more like a ceremonial reenactment of their origin story, and the brothers that were the founders of the people we call the Maya. And so there were significant religious overtones of what happened in their ball games. But essentially what we do know is they used a rubber ball. They were the first cultures to use rubber from rubber trees. And the idea would be to use the rubber ball, and they would try to hit the markers that would be on the court. And they would ostensibly score some points if they could do so. And it was a little bit like soccer. They weren't allowed to use their hands. They had to use their hips and their legs, perhaps, to move the ball around. But they weren't allowed to use their hands. And there are some who say that people who played in the game were sacrificed after the game. I'm not sure that's true or not. And it's certainly not clear if it was the winners or the losers who were sacrificed. If it was the winners, I might have been, as a player, I might have thought of throwing the game, frankly. But we don't really know what happened there. But certainly the ball courts were connected with ceremonial activities. And one of the things we learned at Yashlo Ka, and we've known this from other sites too, but we definitely found it from a pre-classic times at Yashlo Ka, that they made a significant offering that was beneath the ball court. A lot of times the Maya, when they wanted to appease the gods, they would put an offering, let's say, below the floor of their houses to ward off evil spirits or disease or something like that. And they did this at the ball court at Yashlo Ka, that we found an offering there. And in that offering, it was very interesting that we found chili peppers, and we found some leaves that were used to wrap ceremonial bundles. And we also found a plant that has hallucinogenic properties. It's called stabantun, and it's related to plants in the morning glory family. And these were all wrapped in a bundle and placed beneath the floor as they were building the ball court at Yashlo Ka. And this, we believe, was an offering to the gods, so the gods would be happy, and they would bless the people who would be playing the ball games. And sort of the closest thing in our society would have been the idea that when a new ship is built and it is launched, there is often a priest who will go and will throw holy water onto the ship to bless the ship and the seamen who would sail it off into the ocean. And so this is sort of the most analogous thing that I can think of from our society. But ball courts were very ceremonial. The game was important to the Maya. Every large civic ceremonial center had a ball court. Some of them had many. There were many ball courts at Copan, for example, and also Tikal. Calakmul, one of the biggest sites, only has one, curiously, but it's a very nice ball court. And so these were obviously important places for the ancient Maya.
And am I correct that they're sort of centrally located, so you could almost think of it as kind of a town square kind of situation where people would probably gather at these sites?
Yeah, they are. Different sites, they're arranged a little bit differently. But yes, generally they're in sort of the site core, adjacent to large temples. I know the one at Copan is directly adjacent to the Temple of the Inscriptions, and so they have a lot of. There's a direct connection there. Also, the ball court at Calakmul is near Structure 2, which is one of the largest temples. So yes, it would have been in the ceremonial core.
Okay, so thinking about finding the offering under the court, what made you guys look under the court? Is it just routine to kind of excavate that far?
Well, yeah, typically archaeologists like to dig down to bedrock. So you want to find the earliest layer. The Maya often would build over things, and they would modify things. And many of the biggest temples that we find were one temple built over another. And you can think of good political reasons for doing this, that if you're a king, you want to show your power, and you want to, show that you're more powerful than previous kings. And one easy way to do that is, well, we've got this temple out here, and let's put a new surface on it, and we're going to build over it. And it's easier to build over top of one than it is to start from scratch. And so over the years, these temples would get larger and larger. So that was something that the Maya often would do. But in our case, we found the offering for the ball court at Yaxtla, that what had happened is the archaeologists excavated down to bedrock, and right at the end of the season, they had put a trench in that was adjacent to the ball court. They didn't want to actually dig into the ball court itself, but they put a trench, directly in front of it. And so there was an excavation there, and it was still exposed. And at the end of the season, then you have to backfill. You want to fill everything up. You don't want to leave things exposed for a whole bunch of reasons. But so right before the end of the season, my good friend, Dr. Nick Dunning, we were collecting these DNA samples, environmental DNA samples, and we had these cryogenic tubes, and they have preservative in there. And we take these down with us, and we collect as many samples as we can. And right at the end of the season, he went into the trench here below the ball court. He had one tube left. And so he was just looking around for a good place to collect a sample. And he saw this dark stain at the below floor number 4. There were like 4 superimposed floors, and he saw this dark stain, and he said, I wonder what's in there. And so he collected the sample there, and that's the one where we found this. And that dark stain was an organic bundle that was wrapped in. The reason it was a dark stain because it was a concentration of organic material, and his instincts were right on, and he collected what was a very interesting find for us.
Very cool. So, are there challenges with working with the international partners involved? Like when you're working on any of these mine sites that you've been to, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people involved across different agencies.
Well, yes, I mean, it is challenging. It requires a lot of diplomacy. That these are sacred grounds for the people of Mexico, Guatemala, and other countries. These are very important resources and a reflection of their history, and so they want to protect them very well. And so they want to make sure that whoever comes there to work on their sites do so carefully, and then they share the information and also try to help the local communities. And we do all of these things that right now we're preparing to go back to the Calakmul area. We're going to do a workshop for people at the University of Campeche and to help their students learn about archaeobotanical techniques. And and we try to do things to help the local communities. And for example, when we go out into the forest, we study the modern forest. Calakmul is surrounded by tropical rainforest. So, it's in a biosphere reserve. And so we go into that biosphere reserve, into that forest, and we study the trees and the species that are in that forest. And this sort of gives us a baseline for understanding the forest that the Maya used in the past. And while we do that, we had a couple of Chol Maya, these are Maya-speaking people, and they were our guide to the forest, and they really helped our understanding of how trees were used and why a certain tree might be where it was. And so we learned a lot from them. So we have a relationship. But in general, it's, there's a lot of paperwork and getting approval to work there. We feel very fortunate to be able to work at Calakmul, but our friends from the National Institute of Anthropology and History have been very kind and very thoughtful, and they have arranged for us to get permits to work there, and we're very grateful. Some archaeologists aren't as responsible as they should be, to be frank, but we try our best to treat the people and the landscape with respect. And we also make sure that we publish our findings carefully. We submit our reports on time. And I think because of these things that we've been permitted to work in some of the most highly prized sites in Mesoamerica.
So you talked a little bit earlier about their water management and their general land management. And I wanted to know, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for people today from the way Mayan peoples took care of the land around them and managed their resources?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that really the Maya are an excellent distant mirror for our own activities. That a lot of what happened to the ancient Maya are some of the same challenges that our society are facing, perhaps on a bigger scale. For example, their water resources became polluted with blue-green algae. They also had mercury contamination in some of their reservoirs. They cleared too much of the land, and that's interrupted the hydrologic cycle, so it reduced the rainfall, and perhaps the Maya contributed to the droughts of the 9th century, which caused the abandonment of many of the large centers. So I think our society can learn a lot from studying the Maya. Somebody said that if you want to understand the present, you should understand the history, and that goes for prehistory too.
Fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned kind of ceremonial sacrifice a little bit, and I wanted to ask you about, there seems to be kind of two perspectives on it, whether it was happening a lot or whether it's more spin that the Spanish put on it after the fact. How much was this kind of the idea of human sacrifice actually part of Mayan culture to your understanding?
Well, I think it certainly was part of Maya culture. I think it was part of most Mesoamerican cultures. I think it gets overemphasized a lot because that what we see oftentimes, many ceremonies, like the one ceremonial bundle I talked about, there was no blood in there. It was these were plants. It was a plant offering, and I think a lot of ceremonial offerings, the day-to-day ceremonies, did not involve the sacrifice of human beings. It might involve the sacrifice of a chicken. Of course, the ancient Maya didn't have chickens, but but we do have evidence that there were sacrifices, and probably a lot of that came from people who were captured during warfare. They were brought back and they were sacrificed. Their hearts may have been cut out. They may have died in various ways. They did do human sacrifices. I think probably the number of human sacrifices is possibly overplayed, that the typical routine ceremonies would not involve human sacrifices. Many of the books were burned, and that is a great tragedy that that Western culture is perpetrated on the Maya people, and that was a huge loss. But you know, the upside is it's great that we still have 4 of them, and there may be more. One of the codices was found just a couple of decades ago, so there may be some more out there that are in, say, private collections or something that will come to the fore. So it is a shame, but we're lucky to have 4 left.
One of the other sites you worked on is Hoya de Seren, which is kind of similar to Pompeii, but in El Salvador. Can you tell us a little bit about your work there and what you've learned?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Hoya de Seren, it's a wonderful archaeological site. It was, the director there was my good friend, Pacey Sheets, who did a magnificent job of excavating that site. And we learned so much from that site. One of the problems that we have in Mesoamerica is, in general, the preservation of plant remains is not very good. You have the wet and dry tropics, and things tend to rot and not be preserved very well. But as in Pompeii, the village of Seren was covered with volcanic ash right around AD 600. And although the people escaped, there are no bodies laying around, but all the tools they had, or most of the tools they had, and their food and their granaries and their fields with the crops still in them, were recovered. So we could see exactly how they grew their crops, where they grew them in relationship to their villages. We could see how they stored their food. We could we found out what kind of vessels were used to store different kinds of food, where their kitchens were. I mean, it was just phenomenal to work there, and just a great bunch of people. And now that place that nobody even knew about is really the jewel of archaeology for the people of El Salvador.
I think I saw one paper where you were identifying roots of some of the plants based on the structure that was left behind. Can you tell me a little bit about what kind of plants they were growing around their houses there?
Oh, yeah. Well, for a long time, archaeologists, people thought that the Maya civilization was largely based on maize. Maize was very important to them. But at Seren, we've got a slightly different picture. That we not only found fields of maize, but we found extensive fields of manioc. And people may not recognize that name manioc, but for Europeans and Americans, we call that tapioca. And that plant, it's really an amazing plant. It's a root crop, and it is one of the most, if not the most productive plant per acre in terms of calories per acre. And so we see that the people of Seren not only ate maize, but they had a substantial investment and extensive fields of manioc. So manioc was indeed very important to the Maya farmers of Hoya de Seren. So that really sort of created a paradigm shift in what we understood of as the Maya agriculture. And also we learned that they had fields that were ridged and furrowed, which we had never seen before. So they were practicing ridge and furrow agriculture, which of course is really good for preserving soil and preventing erosion. And actually it enhances your productivity. So this was one means of intensive agriculture that the Maya clearly practiced that we didn't know anything about before Seren.
Special thanks to David Lentz. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Potker. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.